You're very welcome here if you are a regular or if you are brand new or just passing through. It's lovely to see you and have you with us this morning. My name is Teressa. Thanks. And I'm part of the community here at St Matt's. I've been coming for a few years now. And at the beginning of January, Mike has kicked off for us this new series that we're doing, this sort of mini-series called One Thing, just picking up on this lovely little phrase that appears every now and again in our Bible. And this week, we're in the Gospel of John. We're in chapter 9, and actually we're going to read it in the Message version this morning, which is a bit unusual, because it really captures what's going on without being confusing. So we're going to dive right into John chapter 9 this morning, starting at verse 1, and I'm going to read it along here on the screen. So here we go. Walking down the street, Jesus saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, causing him to be born blind?" Jesus said, "You're asking the wrong question. You're looking for someone to blame. There is no such cause-effect here. Look instead for what God can do. We need to be energetically at work for the one who sent me here, working while the sun shines. When night falls, the workday is over. For as long as I am in the world, there is plenty of light. I am the world's light." He said this, and then he spit in the dust, made a clay paste with the saliva, rubbed the paste on the blind man's eyes and said, "Go wash at the pool of Siloam." Siloam means sent. The man went and washed and saw. Soon the town was buzzing. His relatives and those who year after year had seen him as a blind man begging were saying, "Why, isn't this the man we knew who sat here and begged?" Others said, "It's him all right," but others objected, "It's not the same man at all, it just looks like him." And he said, "It's me, the very one." And they said, "How did your eyes get opened?" "A man named Jesus made a paste and rubbed it on my eyes and told me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' And I did what he said, and when I washed, I saw." "So where is he?" "I don't know." They marched the man to the Pharisees. This day, when Jesus made the paste and healed his blindness, was the Sabbath. The Pharisees grilled him again on how he had come to see. He said, "He put a clay paste on my eyes, I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "Obviously this man can't be from God, he doesn't keep the Sabbath." Others countered, "How can a bad man do miraculous, God-revealing things like this?" There was a split in their ranks, and they came back at the blind man. "You're the expert. He opened your eyes. What do you say about him?" He said, "He's a prophet." The Jews didn't believe the man was blind to begin with. So they called the parents of the man, now bright-eyed with sight. They asked him, "Is this your son, the one you say was born blind? So how is it that he now sees?" His parents said, "We know he is our son, and we know he was born blind, but we don't know how he came to see, haven't a clue about who opened his eyes. Why don't you ask him? He's a grown man and can speak for himself." His parents were talking like this because they were intimidated by the Jewish leaders, who had already decided that anyone who took a stand that this was the Messiah would be kicked out of the meeting place. That's why his parents said, "Ask him, he's a grown man." So they called the man back a second time, the man who had been blind, and told him, "Give credit to God. We know this man is an imposter." He replied, "I know nothing about that one way or the other, but I know one thing for sure. I was blind and now I see." This is the word of the Lord. I want to share some of my reflections with you on this story this morning, none of which are particularly complex, but I hope that they encourage you. At the beginning of January, when Mike started this series, One Thing, he encouraged us, and Laura's mentioned it again, to surrender to Jesus, But to get to the stage where we're prepared to surrender to somebody or to something, we really do have to trust them. We have to know, what kind of person is this? Are they trustworthy? What will happen if I surrender? And so this morning, perhaps a little bit differently, I want to talk to you about 3 things that Jesus isn't this morning. I want to look at this story and show you 3 things that Jesus doesn't actually do. We're going to dive straight in. First of all, Jesus doesn't blame. Jesus doesn't blame. There's nothing better than a good, meaty conversation with friends, is there? You know, you get together over a pint or a glass of wine and you really put the world to rights. And often a key component of that is, who's to blame? When you're discussing these kind of meaty conversations, who's to blame? Is it individuals? Is it maybe the government? Is it tech companies? Is it energy companies? Is it the far right? Is it the far left? Is it baby boomers? Is it millennials? The possibilities are endless. And the disciples give Jesus this perfect opportunity for a meaty conversation. Who is to blame for this man's misfortune? First century Jews believed that there was basically an indestructible link between sickness and sin. And it was so strong that if it couldn't be explained by something some ancestor did, like his parents or his grandparents, then it must have been that he did something wrong in the 9 months that he was in his mother's womb, which sort of makes our jaws drop a little bit. But they're just trying to explain the world, because if you know who to blame in a situation like this, and you know what they did wrong, then maybe you can avoid making the same mistakes yourself. And if you know who to blame and it isn't you, maybe you can justify your lack of practical compassion. After all, it's their fault. Blame explains away suffering by reducing it to a very simple equation. But Jesus is very clear right off the bat here. You're asking the wrong question. You're looking for someone to blame, and there's no link, there's no cause and effect here. What you need to be doing is looking for what God can do right now in the situation that we have right in front of us. For Jesus, blindness is not an opportunity to blame someone, but an opportunity for him to show that he is the light of the world. When we bring our darkness to Jesus, whatever that darkness might look like, to borrow a phrase that Sally said last week actually in her preach, if we bring Jesus that darkness and we dare to meet his gaze, what we find is welcome and love and hope and healing. Jesus doesn't take the opportunity to blame. Second thing Jesus doesn't do in this story is he doesn't put up any barriers. Now, the nation of Israel was under occupation by the Romans, and the Pharisees get such a bad reputation, but they thought of themselves as sort of part of the Jewish resistance movement. But they thought that rather than try and push the Romans out by force, what you needed to do was to be careful to obey 100% of the law that God had given Moses, 100% of the time. And if the nation of Israel would just do that, for goodness sake, then God would act on their behalf. God would move, and God would kick the Romans out. So they took the law of Moses incredibly seriously, particularly this idea of keeping the Sabbath, that is to say, not doing any work from sundown on Friday until sundown on Saturday. Keeping the Sabbath was a very visible and public display of loyalty to Israel's God. So it was very easy for them then to define who was in and who was out, who was invited and who was not invited to God's community. And the Pharisees took this idea of not working and they developed it into a fine art. So from their perspective, Jesus making clay and Jesus healing a non-life-threatening illness on the Sabbath were both considered to be against the law. But they had totally forgotten that the whole point of the Sabbath was supposed to be a day of rejoicing, a day of community, a day of generosity, a day when the people of God celebrated God's goodness and did good things. So they kept the Sabbath in all the pettiest ways and forgot to keep the Sabbath in the most important way. But Jesus refuses to let their wrong understanding of a religious tradition, no matter how precious it was to them, to keep someone from experiencing the goodness of God. Jesus does not put up barriers. Jesus never acts or speaks in a way that pushes the love and kindness of God further out of reach. I don't know who I'm stealing this quote from, but I remember somebody saying that Jesus puts all the good stuff on the bottom shelf. All the good stuff is in reach for everyone. Jesus doesn't put up barriers. And then the third thing that Jesus doesn't do in this story is that Jesus doesn't brag. I can never get my head around the fact that Jesus doesn't have a massive ego. I would be a terrible Messiah. Awful. Jesus doesn't brag. Look at this story. Firstly, his method. He spits and makes clay with the dust. Now, this is weird to us and disgusting, certainly. But it was a really commonly held belief by first century Romans and Jews that saliva could heal eyes. So Jesus is not actually doing anything particularly unusual or spectacular. He's doing what is expected of a physician. And then Jesus sends this man off to go and wash, so that he isn't even present when the healing occurs to take the glory. The man wanders back into the village healed, no Jesus, has a chat with his neighbours who think he might have a secret twin, no Jesus, called in to have high-level theological discussion with local leaders, no Jesus. I wish this was a film so that we could cut to what Jesus was actually doing during this period of time. I like to think that he was playing with the local kids or belly laughing at some joke a disciples just told. Or perhaps he's off healing somebody whose story doesn't make it into this testament. John only includes 8 miracles in his gospel. He hand selects the ones that he considers to be the most impressive for special attention. Healing a man born blind is a big deal. But we find Jesus gentle and open and free of ego. When we're talking about surrendering to Jesus, we're not talking about surrendering to an invading army whose strength we can't hope to match. We're talking about the kind of surrender that we do when we surrender to a loved one, when we surrender to being listened to by somebody who loves us and they give us their full attention, and we surrender ourselves to that attention. Or when we're sick and a friend brings us food and we eat it, we surrender to their generosity. Jesus doesn't blame, he doesn't put up barriers, and he doesn't brag. I'd like to turn our attention very briefly to our ex-blind man. The Eastern Orthodox and Catholic Church give him a name. I love it when nameless people in the Bible get given a name. His name is Celadonius. It has a lovely Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure ring to it. You can try that on your own time. But Celadonius is immediately in the thick of it. Who healed you? Exactly what happened? Say it again. Who do you think Jesus is? Where are your parents? And my personal favourite, are you sure you used to be blind? Pressure to explain an encounter with Jesus is not a modern phenomenon. It's not a 22nd century phenomenon. And the reactions that this healing provokes aren't that different either. Maybe it's a hoax. Dismissiveness, curiosity, anger, debate, fear. And all of this is coming at a young man who may well still be a teenager. Because that's really the only thing that makes sense of the Pharisees thinking it's a good idea to go and get his parents. So what can Celadonius teach us through his wonderful statement, one thing I know? This is what I took from this story. We are called to be witnesses, not master theologians. We're called to be witnesses, not master theologians. I'm not a massive game show fan, TV game show fan, but when I was growing up, I used to absolutely love the game show Catchphrase. If you're unfamiliar, where have you been? But also, there would be a little cartoon on the screen, and you had to guess the phrase that went along with the cartoon. So it'd be something like raining cats and dogs, or a needle in a haystack. And the catchphrase of the game show Catchphrase was, say what you see. Say what you see. That is what Jesus has called us to say what we see. Celadonius has a very simple story. It is one sentence long. And the story doesn't get more complicated the more times he's asked to tell it. And he doesn't have to offer us a masterful theological explanation of what he thinks has happened, other than to say that he thinks Jesus might be a prophet. And I think sometimes we put ourselves, don't we, under so much pressure when we consider telling somebody about our faith, or when somebody asks us a question. As though in the next 90 seconds we've got to somehow sum up the whole of Christianity from Genesis to Revelation in a way that doesn't mess it up and makes everybody want to follow Jesus. And we worry that we'll do a really bad job. It's a lot of pressure to put on ourselves. But what if we considered that Jesus has only asked us to say what we see? One thing I know. I wonder how you might finish that sentence. Maybe Celadonius has summed it up perfectly for you already. You were stumbling around in the dark, and then you met Jesus, and it was like somebody turned the lights on. If you read on in the story, you'll discover that for Celadonius, this wasn't just a physical healing, but a spiritual awakening as well, as he discovers that Jesus is more than a prophet. And maybe you have your own dramatic story of a life-changing moment with Jesus. Awesome. But if you don't, that's okay. I remember a previous curate here, Rob Fowler, once saying, we can't all used to have been Colombian drug lords. And that's always stuck with me. Okay? Some of us just have gentler experiences of getting to know Jesus. And some of us are not 100% decided even. And that's also okay. Jesus has called us as witnesses and not master theologians. And you shouldn't hesitate to talk about your story just because you can't explain everything. And anyone asking you questions about your faith is interested in your story. And if it creates big questions for them, brilliant. Invite them to Alpha. Seamless plug there. Absolutely seamless. One thing I know. You have to leave a lot out of a sentence like that. And perhaps the longer you've been following Jesus, the more you have to leave out. So when I was prepping this, I was thinking, how am I going to finish that sentence? And I'd encourage you to have a go. Have a little think about it over this week, because the aim isn't to be clever, and the aim isn't to summarise your whole life or the whole Christian faith. And your answer today or this week might bear no resemblance whatsoever to your answer in 3 months or 3 years. But the aim is to say something true about your story and your experience with Jesus. One thing I know is that in my journey of faith, the Jesus that I have met in my life is this Jesus that we read about in stories like this. What is the one thing that you know for sure? One thing I know, I was blind and now I see. Amen.